Good afternoon. I'm Susan Crystal, a member of JCRC's Board of Directors. Thank you for joining us today for celebrating 60 years of Nostra Aetate, in our time, in our community. JCRC is proud to be active in many interreligious and intergroup spaces and recognizes that many of these spaces were made possible by the groundbreaking work of Vatican II and the development of Nostra Aetate. We also want to thank the co-sponsors of this program, American Jewish Committee, AJC, Washington, D.C., and the Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington. Today's speakers will share their insights and experiences in interreligious dialogue and community buildings. On a personal note, I'm especially pleased that my rabbi, Rabbi Ben Sigal, will be one of the panelists. There will be time for questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A feature to submit a question. Captions are available for this program using the tools at the bottom of the screen. It is now my honor to introduce Alan Ronkin, Director, AJC, Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you to all of our friends at JCRC for convening this important conversation. Today, we're going to celebrate something extraordinary, a friendship between Catholics and Jews that our grandparents could hardly imagine. For centuries, misunderstanding and pain stood between our communities. Yet here we are, sharing dialogue, cooperation, and genuine friendship. My friends, that is literally a miracle of history. So how did we get here? As we know, the turning point came in 1965 with a short, revolutionary document, Nostra Aetate, in our time, the Second Vatican Council's declaration on the Church's relationship with non-Christian religions. Few moments in modern Jewish history have done more to strengthen our dignity, security, and standing in the world. So, over the decades, I've noticed that very few Jews have actually read the very brief Nostra Aetate. It's just about 1,100 words, of course, in the Latin, but many Jews, whether they realize it or not, know what's in it. They would probably, or could probably say something like that for the better part of 2 millennia, Christianity portrayed Jews as Christ killers and persecuted our community. And in the latter half of the 20th century, Christianity stopped doing that. And they wouldn't be wrong, even if that one-sentence summary lacks nuance or details. So we all know that for nearly 2,000 years, Christian teaching included ideas that fueled hostility toward Jews, none more damaging than the claim that all Jews, in every generation, bore responsibility for the death of Jesus. That falsehood led to centuries of discrimination, violence, and persecution. Nostra Aetate changed that story, and its achievements were monumental. Number one, it rejected the deicide charge that, as I said, Jews as a people were declared not responsible for Jesus' death. It condemned anti-Semitism as a sin. It affirmed the enduring covenant between God and the Jewish people, and it urged Catholics to see Judaism as a living faith and to engage Jews with respect and friendship. Per Nostra Aetate's declaration, Jews are not to be presented as rejected or accursed by God. Anti-Semitism is unacceptable. Christianity's roots are in Judaism. Perhaps most importantly, that Jesus and the apostles were Jewish. In 1965, that wasn't yet obvious. That is, that Jesus was born a Jew, raised a Jew, taught as a Jew, and died as a Jew. And lastly, in this abridged list of Nostra Aetate content, God's covenant with the Jewish people remains in force. 15 years later, Pope John Paul II famously expanded upon that with a most memorable theological statement. God's covenant with the Jewish people was, he said, never revoked. Even with this progress, our work is far from finished. We face real challenges: rising anti-Semitism, gaps in understanding, tensions around Israel, and the need for education. Let me address just two of these issues. Number one, tensions around Israel. Political disagreements sometimes strain relationships. We must ensure that policy debates never slip into theological stereotypes or hostility toward Jews. If we've learned anything in the last 2 years about this relationship, it must include acknowledgement that the Catholic Church and Jewish leadership, be they be Israeli leaders or Jewish diaspora leaders, do not always see eye to eye in interpreting the unfolding events in the Holy Land. This will not solve itself. It requires more conversations, not fewer conversations, including on the centrality and complexity of the State of Israel to Jewish identity and on the Catholic theology of the land. If we do not figure out how to speak about differences of opinion regarding Israel, Catholic-Jewish relations will remain vulnerable. Education. Even as Nostra Aetate was being promulgated, there are already innumerable dioceses throughout the literal or metaphorical global south, especially in much of Asia and Africa, where there are few to no Jews or manifestations of Judaism. In the ensuing years, Catholic populations increased significantly in those regions, while the church has been shrinking in places where Jews and Christians have been living side by side for decades, like in Europe and North America. Encountering Jews and Judaism is a key teaching element in the success of Nostra Aetate. In fact, I was recently at a conference at Catholic University where we met a Catholic priest whose job it is to train Catholic Church clergy to expunge anti-Semitism from their preaching. He began his connection with Jews when he learned Hebrew from a Holocaust survivor whose family took him in. Many Jews have also not accepted that the Catholic Church in general and wider Christianity in general have changed. They are locked into an antiquated Esav Sonei Yaakov, that Esau hates Jacob, a metaphor for Christians hate Jews, which leaves them feeling isolated and missing an opportunity to make real change. I am hopeful for the future of Catholic-Jewish relations. Nostra Aetate changed the world, and we are not going back. Our grandparents would have never thought this possible. We can and must imagine a future that we can do the impossible and make it happen. So I'd like to talk briefly about AJC's role in this process. This transformation did not happen by accident. American Jewish Committee played an extraordinary role in shaping Nostra Aetate. AJC leaders saw before almost anyone else that Vatican II could reshape Catholic teaching about Jews. Instead of protesting from the outside, we chose a strategy of relationship building, scholarship, and moral clarity. We jumped at the opportunity to make a difference. At the center was Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum, AJC's Director of Interreligious Affairs, a tireless diplomat who built trust with Vatican leaders. He brought in Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, his teacher at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and a profound moral voice to the Vatican to participate in the process. When Rabbi Heschel, who had lost most of his family in the Shoah, the Holocaust, was asked why he became involved, he answered both simply and profoundly that it was a chance to save Jewish lives. He understood that if Christianity was to be portrayed as contributing toward the history of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, then Christianity needed to lead as the transforming agent which could change bad history into a better future. Heschel's unforgettable statement to Catholic leaders was, "I do not want to be saved. I want to live as a Jew in the light of God's covenant." This profound statement, which underscored the incredible opportunity for theological transformation, echoed in the ears of the Church. AJC provided historical research, theological analysis, and documentation that helped the Church confront the painful legacy of its own teaching. We provided facts and let them draw their own conclusions. Our respectful but firm approach demanded that if the Church wanted to heal wounds, it needed to speak clearly and forcefully. We also worked very closely with Cardinal Augustine Bay, who led the drafting of the document. There's much more to say about our role, but suffice it to say, It is one of our most significant accomplishments, one of the greatest achievements in the struggle against anti-Semitism and for Jewish security. For a people with memories of persecution, often justified by religion, the transformation ushered in by Nostra Aetate is a profound moral shift. But history does not move in a straight line. Progress must be nurtured. We must confront new challenges and strengthen friendships that earlier generations could only dream of. Pope John Paul II gave us that charge when on the 50th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, he famously said, "As Christians and Jews, following the example of the faith of Abraham, we are called to be a blessing unto the world." That's Genesis chapter 12. It is therefore necessary for us, Christians and Jews, to be first a blessing to one another. That is the legacy of Nostra Aetate and of AJC's visionary work, and it is our responsibility to carry it forward with courage, hope, and faith in the power of human dignity. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Alan, for that introduction and that history that we are now ready to build on. And I am so excited to be here today. Oh, I should introduce myself. I'm Rabbi Abby Sharofsky. I'm the Director of Intergroup Relations and Rabbi in Residence for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, the JCRC. And I am, like I said, I'm very excited to be here today with so many amazing colleagues. Father Don Rooney of St. Bernadette's Church in Springfield, Virginia, Rabbi Ben Sigal at Olam Tikvah in Fairfax, Virginia, and Dr. Sousan Abadian, Executive Director of the Interfaith Council for Metropolitan Washington. And thank you as well, to Alan Ronkin for leading us off and really setting a stage for where we came from and now giving us and now we'll have the opportunity to see what all of that means right here in our community. I also just want to recognize that there are so many people on this call, on this webinar, who, as I look through the names, are truly giants in this field and have played roles, really tremendous roles in pushing forward and growing Jewish Catholic dialogue, including working with both in the local, national, and international levels. So it is wonderful and humbling to be in this conversation with so many of you today. So Rabbi Sigal, Father Don, our first questions are for you. So if we can pin them onto the screen as well, and we'll open up our conversation. So first, I'll ask you, Father Don, how did Nostra Aetate impact your relationship with Jews before you were a priest? While the doctrine may not have been known to you, what did it look like in seminary or even before seminary, relationships between Jews and Catholics?
Well, thank you, Rabbi. Thank you all for allowing this to happen today. This is wonderful. I think when you said that about all these leaders being on this call, I need to say something as a sort of a preface that I am not a scholar. I'm a pastor, and I've been involved in national dialogues because Pope Francis wanted pastors as well as theologians. And so I've had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of this. I have to tell you that before I was in the seminary, I did not know about this document at all. And even in the seminary, the kind of formation that we received was minimal. We studied Vatican II, we understood the documents, but we never really put it into action. And I think that this kind of dialogue has to be performative, not just about, but the action that comes as a result of that. In the seminary, I became aware of this. I was involved in a couple of interreligious and ecumenical seminars, which was the first time I really was exposed. And then in 2002, I was pastor in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and the diocesan director, I guess he got to know me a little bit. He recognized that I like to make relationships and I liked to get to know people. And he asked me, he was retired, and he said, you're going to take on this job. So that was like my baptism by fire. And I started to discover the amazing work that is being done on much higher levels that never really trickles down. So since that time, I've been really dedicated to trying to do local things. I have to say our relationship with Jewish people in Northern Virginia hasn't been really strong, and I think that that's probably one area that I would like to go to. But I had an experience not too long ago when Rabbi Sigal he invited our clergy group, our Burke Springfield clergy group, to come to Rosh Hashanah, and I'd never been invited before. And this is what we need to do. We need to get our people to get to know each other. The high level dialogues and everything else, they're not getting out there. But to have the experience to get together with a congregation, Olam Tikvah, and to watch their devotion and to watch their spirituality and respect and what I saw is true faith. I was so moved by that. When that happens, that's when you want to start to get more involved. So in the parish, I would say I've only learned it because I've been invited. I've had the opportunity, not on the level of dialogue, but on the level of dialogue of life and interaction. And out of that, we've had some really great. I've had some really great experiences, and I want more.
Thank you. I love that, in the level of life. Rabbi Sigal, what were your relationships like, I guess, while you were in seminary, in rabbinical school, and sort of forming ideas of what your rabbinate might look like? How did Jewish Catholic relations play into that? And what does it look like now? I'm also very curious, what made you invite your colleagues of various faiths to Rosh Hashanah services?
Sure. So there's, I guess the starting point is that I went to the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies out in Los Angeles. And what I got there was very much so shaped by all my teachers, but most notably by Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who's been in some of these higher level conversations with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. In addition to him, Rabbi Gail Leibovitz, who was one of my teachers and who's the Ziegler representative as a part of InterSem, which is a meeting of a lot of different seminaries that are based in the Los Angeles area. Ziegler's one of them. It's St. John's was the Catholic representation. There were a couple of evangelical groups as well as a Muslim group that was actually based out of Chicago, and I don't remember how they ended up being involved in a group in Los Angeles, but those conversations were really meaningful. It was generally done as an overnight at a camp outside of the city of LA. And the one time that I fully attended from the conversations as students, trying to figure out what are we even going to talk about, and building out the program all the way through to the experience. I got a partial experience because that was in February of 2021, and we still weren't doing a ton of things in person. So everything was done online. But having those conversations, I'm still in touch with a lot of people who were now all ordained and doing work out in the world. So that played a big part of it. In terms of when I learned about Nostra Aetate, it was also in school. I grew up in a very Jewish environment, going to public school, but when 30% of your public school is Jewish, that just becomes your friend group kind of naturally. And especially as we're going to some of the same synagogues together. And so building that out meant that I wasn't really having these relationships on that level until rabbinical school, and it was there that I saw the power of what those relationships can look like, both in learning different traditions and ways that we go about bringing our faith tradition to our different communities, ways that that can be shared across our different faith traditions. And so that was really a powerful experience in rabbinical school that I wanted to bring into my rabbinate. And in addition, over the past 2 and change years, seeing how the Jewish community has at times felt very alone in the post-October 7th world, trying to build those bridges and strengthen them whenever possible so that we can have those sorts of relationships that we really need. That I think that's really at the heart of what led to that invitation to our clergy group.
And how was that invitation received? Father Don said he showed up. I'm just curious, who else came, and what was that experience like?
So we had one other individual who joined us from the Rooney Foundation, and they each came on different days, so they each got very different experiences. Um, but I know I heard from my congregants, the ones who noticed at least, um, so many of them were so appreciative of having people of other faith traditions there to see and to be a part of our holiest days of the year. It really meant a lot to them, and I hope, Father Don, that it meant a lot to you as well. It sounds like it did. But just to know that those sorts of experiences really make a wonderful difference, and yeah, it's beautiful to see these sorts of things on a person-to-person level as well.
I think that's where it has to happen. Um, I want to say also that my experience there, despite the depth and the beauty of the ritual, what I would call liturgy, um, and how much I realized we had in common, and I could really, there were so many people that came up to me, and it was kind of a long morning. But there were so many people that came up to me, and they could tell if I wasn't like following in the book in the right place. They were so helpful. They all came around and welcomed me in the middle of, everything going on. And I wish that if you all came to St. Bernadette, we would provide that same kind of welcome because it was just beautiful. I felt like I really belonged there.
So I will say, having been to St. Bernadette's, attending a memorial mass for the late Pope Francis, I was there with my daughter and several other interfaith colleagues, and yes, that same feeling of welcome, of people saying hello to us, quick to greet us, quick to say, it means so much that you're here. For me, at least, was this moment of, oh, it's not just how good it feels when people come to support the Jewish community, but what does it mean to show up for our Catholic neighbors during this time of grief and transition? And being able to be there with your community, Father Don, was really something special. And having the opportunity to talk with people afterwards and learn more about how their experiences with other faith groups in the neighborhood, as well as what it meant to them to be in this point of transition, as a Catholic and as a citizen of the greater world. It was really powerful few hours.
Well, it is so satisfying, and I think this is the place this works. I served for 12 out of 15 years as the president of the National Association of Ecumenical and Interreligious Officers for the Conference of Bishops, and never had the kind of success we're having in our little neighborhood, Burke and Springfield. It is so awesome to see where it's actually real. And if people get together and they don't know each other, but they suddenly think, oh, child of God, made in the image of God, this authentic faith and this really good kindness that people can show. That's how this is going to work. And I think that's maybe what Nostra Aetate made available, if people would just realize what is possible. And I'm afraid in our church, there's still a lot of people that Well, I talk about it all the time, but there's a lot of people who really aren't, they're still suspicious of it, I'm afraid.
So that brings to my final question for you both before we bring in Sousan is you spoke about some of the highlights. Where do we see the points of difficulty right now?
Well, I'll step out on a limb here and say something that might not be the most appreciated, but there's a question that comes up on the question board. It says, has the church spoken out on the role of Hamas in their efforts to destroy Israel? I find that our leadership, and I guess they have to be diplomatic and they have to be very careful about what they say because there's so many relationships that are so conflicting and everything else. But I would like our leadership in the Catholic Church to have this as more of a priority. You know, these dialogues happen like once a year, when I think that we should have synagogues and parishes, churches, inviting each other every month. You know, it's so I'm frustrated by the fact that it doesn't seem to be a priority for our church leadership at this time. And I wanted to quote something that I came across. It was Pope Francis in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti. He said that we have to pray, and this had to do, you know, the whole Nostra Aetate was written because John the 23rd realized something had to be said about the Shoah. Something had to be acknowledged by the Catholic Church. And Pope Francis and Fratelli Tutti, which I don't know, was like 2008 or something like that, he says we must pray for the grace to be ashamed of what we have done and not done. And I think that's such a powerful statement from our Holy Father, that we've got to pray for the grace to be ashamed, because that's the only way the healing is going to start to come together.
Wow, that is truly a powerful statement. Thank you for bringing that. Rabbi Sigal, same question for you. What do you see as some of the difficulties in this moment?
I think there's a couple different pieces to it that I see as difficulties. I think part of it is something that both of us reflected on, which is that this doctrine isn't out there as a known thing amongst so many people who aren't spending years of their life in seminary, and so trying to build that out in so many ways, whether it's in um, person-to-person relationships in synagogues and parishes, having stronger relationships, what that might look like, so that it's known that this isn't just something that we can do, but it's something that we should be embracing. Um, I know from the Jewish community, sometimes it can be really hard for us to put that hand out and say, "Come on in," when the world looks very scary at times. And as I referenced before, I think that that's really at the heart of how we make the world not so scary a place, is by welcoming in so many people who are interested in being our friends, but might just feel like they need the invitation to come be a part of that dialogue. So really being the welcomers of those sorts of conversations is what can develop this into a lot more than just words on a page, but an actual lived out doctrine.
And that takes a certain amount of vulnerability and
Absolutely.
willingness to go into, entering into a new relationship is scary, and that move forward is scary. And um, one of the things that certainly helps is having colleagues and being part of a larger network, which is a perfect segue to introduce Dr. Sousan Abadian from the Interfaith Network. So I'm gonna add you to the pin and welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, from your experience in leading the Interfaith Council, how have you seen the spirit of Nostra Aetate play out in practical interfaith work today?
Well, thanks for inviting me to join this conversation. It's such a joy to join three of my wonderful IFC board members here, Rabbi Abby, Father Don, and Alan Ronkin. I'm so proud. And I, like Father Don, am not by any means a scholar of Nostra Aetate, but what I am is a scholar of culture change and leadership, which Nostra Aetate is a prime example. And my background is also in healing long-standing collective trauma and transforming trauma narratives, which again is another, I think, what this notes. And so, as all the speakers have already noted, and Alan has so eloquently described, one of the things that has moved me most about Nostra Aetate is not only what it said, but what it signified. This was a 2,000-year-old institution looking honestly at its own story, one that had at times caused immense harm, and saying, in effect, this no longer serves love or truth. We must change. So this was an act of profound religious leadership. It represented a remarkable shift in posture. It invited Catholics to acknowledge that truth and holiness exists in other religious traditions, that every religion was a quest for truth and every sincere seeker as reflecting something of the divine mystery, and that those once seen as outsiders or adversaries might actually be companions in the search for what is sacred. That kind of transformation, the willingness to evolve one's narrative for the sake of healing relationships, is at the heart of what I see unfolding in interfaith work today. Not so much through official statements, but through daily practice. And at the IFC, I often describe this journey in two movements. I call it interfaithing light and interfaithing deep. Now, interfaithing light is where we begin. It's the work of welcome, curiosity, hospitality, and celebration. And it looks a lot like walking together at our annual IFC Unity Walk, or sharing a Ramadan iftar, or opening the door to Rosh Hashanah service, as Rabbi Sigal initiated and Father Don took part in, or showing up to learn at one of IFC's Ask Us Anything religious and cultural literacy sessions. So there's openness, and sometimes even what has been called holy envy. We recognize the beauty in one another's traditions. It builds safety and trust. And without that foundation, nothing deeper is possible. But if previous generations opened the door by engaging in interfaithing light, today we're being asked to walk through it. Interfaithing deep emerges when a relationship has ripened enough to hold gentle honesty, not only about what connects us, but also about the places in history or theology that have created separation or even harm. It asks for courage and tenderness at the same time. Sometimes before we can have those harder conversations, we also need to engage in shared service or action, working together towards justice, the environment, or healing, so that trust and connection strengthens before complexity enters. But when we're able to have the difficult conversations, something profound happens. People who arrive, they arrived representing their faith, leave feeling seen, and trust ripens and change, both on the personal and relational levels become possible. So it's not with fanfare, but in the quiet weaving of perception that shifts how communities live and act together. So when I think about the spirit of Nostra Aetate today, I don't see it primarily in formal declarations. I see it in the way practitioners choose again and again to meet difference, not with fear, but with curiosity, not with avoidance, but with honesty, and not to perform unity, but to slowly build it, because we understand that how we walk together now shapes the future we're creating, not just for communities, but as a legacy for our children and all those who come after us.
So thinking about where, your reflections on the impact and that interfaithing light versus interfaithing deep. Did I get it? Yeah, I love that you use interfaith as a verb or gerund or some. I did not do well in grammar, but I love how you phrase that, and that because it is an actual a deep action that has to happen. You can't just show up to a few things and say, okay, I do interfaith. Well, yes, you do light. But once like we talked about, that vulnerability, that grace, all of those very hard things all come with that deep action. And I want to push a little bit on some of the other faith traditions that are not represented on this call, and also to push a bit beyond the Abrahamic faith traditions. One of these questions came up from the attendees, as well as something that I had asked about beforehand. What can other faith traditions, especially beyond the three Abrahamic faiths, learn from Nostra Aetate, both that there was this process, but also the spirit in which it moves forward? And where do you see areas of growth for interfaith dialogue?
Yeah, well, I still think there's a lot of work to be done in the Abrahamic faiths, to tell you the truth. I don't think all the Abrahamic faiths have done their work, frankly. But I'm not gonna. Of course, this reflection is for all the faiths. And again, to
We
me,
all still have a lot to do.
we have a lot to do. And to me, again, one of the most powerful lessons of Nostra Aetate is that even ancient, deeply rooted communities can evolve their narratives when they recognize that something is no longer aligned with dignity or truth. And so that kind of institutional courage to turn towards accountability and choose a different path is something all our traditions can learn from. So importantly, Nostra Aetate marked a shift away from religious exclusivism, the idea of a single path to truth, toward a posture more of a spiritual humility and shared seeking. Again, it's not finished, but at least it started that for Catholicism. It invited recognition that wisdom and holiness may reside beyond one's own tradition, and that every sincere faith journey may carry insight into the sacred. That shift alone represented a profound change in how religious communities relate to one another, and is something other faiths can learn from. So in my own work, writing and speaking about, I talk about generative cultural renewal, the capacity of communities to outgrow inherited storylines that cause trauma and limit how we relate, and to author new ones that make space for healing and expansion. But transformation never happens only on one side. So for any genuine gesture of repair to take root, it also requires something equally profound from those receiving it. Not erasure of the past, not easing accountability, but the courage to reorient towards the future, to step out of being solely defined by the injury and into authorship of what comes next. So another way of putting this is, yes, the Vatican's outreach was an act of moral courage and religious leadership. Yet what was quietly asked of members of the Jewish community was something I think was even more complex. Not only courage, but a kind of graciousness, which Rabbi Heschel and Mark Tannenbaum modeled so beautifully. A willingness to respond from dignity rather than solely from injury, while still honoring the truth of that injury. Now that is profound, but often unacknowledged, an act of strength. So perhaps one of the enduring teachings of Nostra Aetate is this: true transformation takes courage on all sides, the courage to evolve the narrative and the courage to be future oriented, even while holding history with honesty. So looking ahead, I believe the greatest area of growth is in moving more consistently, as you described, from interfaithing light to interfaithing deep. And I just want to note the verb thing. I mean, I'm realizing that one of the big distinctions between indigenous cultures and more Western cultures is indigenous cultures live in verbs, things are in motion and action and change. And so they're not static like nouns. So I guess it seemed very comfortable for me to change interfaith into a verb as an action. But we've come a long way in the realm of interfaithing light in celebration, curiosity, and symbolic unity. Of course, we've got a lot more to go. But the next frontier, in my view, is relational work that can hold truth and grief without fracturing connection, where we can acknowledge hard history gently, approach difference with tenderness rather than defensiveness, and understand that interfaith work is not simply about coexisting, it's really about co-evolving. In other words, interfaithing deep requires the courage to allow grief its voice without letting grief define the future. It means honoring the past while choosing to step forward whole, not as a perpetual victim or perpetrator, but as an active author of what comes next. So, if the first step was moving from only we hold the truth to truth lives amongst us all, then maybe the next step is learning how to live that truth in relationship through complexity, honesty, and shared responsibility for the future. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you. And your point about trauma brings us to one of the questions that's in the chat, and I bring this question back to Rabbi Sigal and to Father Don. Given this transformational change in Jewish Catholic relations, And really that so much work went into building these relationships. Were you at all surprised about the tensions of the last 2 years? Why or why not?
I would say I'm not surprised. I think that what we have is a very fragile relationship. I think that the church says, well, I have a friend who's a church historian. He says that every teaching that's promulgated in the Catholic Church will not be fully accepted for 100 years. So here we are, 60 years into Nostra Aetate, and it's going to be after my lifetime that this is ever going to happen. So we work for the next generation, or we plant the seeds that somebody else harvests. But this, I think that no, I think that there's so much work we have to do, and I think that the reason it's not happening so quickly is because we don't have the real relationships on the ground. That's what I think. I was just looking at, I have a translation of Nostra Aetate that was actually made by Tom Stransky, who was the Paulist priest who was on the commission that wrote this document. He just died a few years ago, and I would talk with him a little bit about this, and he says if you notice in um, the language of this document is very cautious still. It's groundbreaking, but it's still very cautious. So when he talks about Buddhism, when it talks about Buddhism and Hinduism, for example, there's a quote that says the Catholic Church rejects nothing that is true and holy in these religions. So that was the first step, first baby step. But the next step has to be the Catholic Church embraces everything that is true and holy in these religions, right? It's that kind of weird sort of backing into the new reality that you can see happening. And that's kind of the way this document is. I think that there should be a Nostra Aetate 2.0. That's what I think. And we have the opportunity to kind of place it into the context of right now and how we have this desire. I guess I just jumped into the next question, but we have this desire to make it work, right? That never really existed before 60 years ago. There was a priest. Nobody really knows these stories, but there was a priest in the I think 48. His name was Feeney. He was in Boston, and he was preaching in public that outside of the Catholic Church there was no salvation, and they took him out of the priesthood. He was silenced, and he was not able to speak publicly until he took it back, and he wouldn't take it back. But the church has never taught that. It's just that there is this cultural context that seems to want to keep us separate. And I was thinking a lot about this as I was preparing for today. I think about Jewish congregations with metal detectors and armed guards, and I feel so sad that my people had something to do with placing you in that isolationist place. And if you could just know the embrace, and I think you would experience a kind of freedom. Now, I'm not saying Catholics have had a good time all the time either. In fact, we're still trying to convince a lot of people that Catholics are Christians. you know so it's but there's just this kind of automatic default, you're you and we're us, and that's it. And somehow we have to build that connection, and the connection is friendship. That's all there is to it. Friendship and that shared witness of what you do is beautiful and what we do is beautiful, and we're seeking that same mystery presence of God, that divine spark that is in all of us that we need to find together, right? And acknowledge.
I appreciate you not sugarcoating that and that um, because it does take a lot of time for these doctrines and these ideas to take hold. And to say that you aren't surprised, I think is I dare to say refreshing, but I want to, but more that the honesty that's there. It's acknowledging that we know that things are challenging, and we know that this is still a challenge, and that this wasn't over simply because, well, a doctrine was written 60 years ago, and therefore it was written, so it must be true and it must be held on to. I think and Rabbi Sigal, I encourage you to jump in at any point on this, but
Yeah.
I know I recall hearing surprise from members of the Jewish community on this. If you want to, please share where your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I also don't think that I was particularly surprised at what the last couple of years have looked like. One piece of context that I've had multiple colleagues keep turning back to in conversations about this is that October 7th happened about 2.5 years, 3 years after we all went into a fight or flight response from COVID, where we were all turning inward and just trying to make sure that our individual communities could sustain themselves through COVID. And for us in the Jewish community as well, there were pieces that of interfaith work that had understandably been not been the priorities during COVID that we hadn't quite found our way back to. And so I think in a lot of the last couple years, what I've noticed is that the tension has existed far more in places where there aren't person-to-person relationships, and we weren't focusing on that as religious communities, I think in general, but certainly in the Jewish community, in those years leading between COVID and October 7th. And so it shouldn't, I know that people were surprised by it, and I I'm saddened by it, but I don't know that with that context that it's so surprising, um, given the fact that we've all been focused on just trying to keep our congregations um, getting the resources that they need in those moments. Um, I want to preface, or I guess it's a little late into this to preface it, but I've only been in at Olam Tikvah for about a year and a half, and so to the extent um, that this has been something that I've been able to be a part of here, it's not just a here thing either, right? I don't think I wasn't speaking on a here basis. I speak on in the many different communities I've lived that um, it's really hard to reach out that hand, and it becomes a lot easier when you know that there's someone there inviting you in. The way I ended up in this dialogue with a lot of different faith leaders in the Springfield Burke area is because Reverend Becca Messa invited me to the group after having been a part of a separate conversation that I showed up to where I wasn't expecting to have any sort of colleague to colleague conversation. And we had conversations there, and that led to a conversation just between the two of us and to building this out. So I think some of it is on a religious leader basis, but I also think some of it is just on a neighbor to neighbor basis. Um, we don't have a society anymore where people move into a house and all the neighbors come with cookies in quite the same way that it was when my parents moved from Minnesota to outside Chicago about 30 years ago. And so trying to build up that society is not something that's just for us as religious leaders. It's something that anyone in our congregations can do.
So the question about the laity as well as broader religious education is coming up in several of the questions from the audience. These questions are amazing. So I really I'm learning so much about what is what's on people's minds and how this issue is impacting people, as well as from all of you. So thank you for that, everyone. The question though about how do we continue this education, where are doctrines like Nostra Aetate, well, specifically Nostra Aetate, as well as other conversations about interreligious dialogue and pluralism, where are they showing up in our religious education? And what might that mean for, the next generation of not just clergy, but religious educators and informed laity? Father Don, I know
Uh,
there's a school on your church's campus.
Yeah, yeah, I
Is
think
it
that they
taught?
have. I think that they have a thing on comparative religions, but I don't think there's any. And there's no education about Nostra Aetate for sure. Church teachings, I don't think so. That's something I that convicts me at this moment. I have to look into that.
I did put you on the spot with that. So
No, no, that's okay. That's okay because I did it when I was president of CADEO. We did a survey of all the seminaries in the United States. There were maybe like three seminaries that had anything to do with ecumenical and interreligious as part of their curriculum. They would have like somebody come in and speak for a day or something like that, but there was nothing offered. And we took it to the bishops, and I don't believe that much has been done about it even now. So, um, but no, I think it's if the kids come to church, we have one of those parishes that's just loaded with kids, and they hear me talk about this all the time. And we're going to have this big Thanksgiving interfaith service tomorrow night at St. Bernadette. Everybody come, 7 o'clock, reception to follow. But I think it's by doing things like that that people start to think about what this really means. I had somebody come up to me just not too long ago from my parish and said she was really bothered by the fact that the church had this understanding that you had to be Catholic in order to be pleasing in the eyes of God. And I pointed out to her in every one of our Eucharistic prayers, except one, there is a prayer that says we pray for all of our brothers and sisters who have gone in faith and all those whose faith is known to God alone. There's several different iterations of that. We pray it at every single mass, that we pray for those who a merciful God is going to welcome into the kingdom, kind of thing. And I don't know why people don't get it. It's there. I wanted to say too that I'm still thinking about the October 7th question. What makes it particularly complicated also is that the world does not realize that there are Palestinian Christians and that in the conflict they have all but disappeared. And so I think the church really doesn't know what to do with that. I know there have been statements made. I think Pope Francis said some things that mm, he said a lot of things, but I know his heart wasn't with how it was received in the media. But I think that the Christians, I have had a little nonprofit that I've tried to support Christians in Bethlehem for about 23 years now, and we've been able to send support. Like right now, we're helping with hydroponic growing programs because they can't get food, so they're growing their own, and so we provide all the stuff to set that up, and they can even grow stuff and take it to market. So, but helping out in little ways like that because the population is now less than 1% Christian, where it used to be around 30. And so the October 7th thing, it looks like this conflict, and there is no forgiving what Hamas did. And I will say that absolutely, there is no forgiveness for that because they're not asking for it. But I think that the what has happened has taken the Christian population and kind of put them in the middle, and I think that troubles a lot of people. We don't really know what to think about it, to be honest.
I think that's once again, a very honest and wow. There's so much there that's another webinar almost
Yeah.
entirely. But I do think from that, not quite knowing what to do and how to reconcile the place of Christians and what's going on with and for Christians right now in Israel, in Palestinian territories like the West Bank and Gaza. Um, I do think I agree with you that that's made things even more complicated, taking a complicated situation and just exacerbating it on every single level, if at all possible. As you were sharing about the congregation, I was reminded the one of the communities and the ways I first heard about the attacks on October 7th was from a message from a Catholic priest who was at the Hebrew speaking church in Jerusalem, the Hebrew speaking Catholic church in Jerusalem. And hearing from Father Benny what was going on was this moment of, um, you know, truly, we're all in this together, and we need to figure out how to move forward in this, even when it became complicated. And while yes, there were many things that came from the Vatican over the last 2 years and from Pope Francis, I personally have felt that the relationships with individuals within the church, with individual priests, bishops, cardinals, has stood out more so than anything that was written or shared in the media. Just for me and for the relationships that myself and I know other colleagues on this call have, again and again, the relationships are what make this work possible and what continue to hold us even when it gets very difficult. Um, I know I'm not going to get to all of the questions that are in here. Uh, I'm also looking at the time. What if thinking about clergy and lay leaders that are about to embark on this work, what advice do you give them as and I think for all three of our panelists, what would you say to someone who is starting out, especially in this moment, in trying to do this work? Rabbi Sigal, do you want to kick us off? Or if you need a moment?
Well, it just looked like Dr. Abadian had something that she wanted to say first, so by all means.
I'll go if that's okay. I can go or I can wait. But I would just offer three simple suggestions. One is to begin with curiosity rather than certainty. So rather than leading with answers, lead with sincere questions and show up to learn, not to explain. So interfaith work begins when we allow someone else's experience of the sacred to touch us, even if we don't share those beliefs. So posture of openness invites trust. And then the second thing that I would really suggest from my own work is to do your inner work. Unexamined, any kind of unexamined wounds can unintentionally reenact separation. And if we haven't tended to our own emotional and spiritual healing, we may show up guarded, reactive, or needing to be right. So it's essential to cultivate the ability to stay present even when we feel challenged. And this makes us safer to trust. And the third thing is just to build authentic relationships before you need them. I mean, we've said this over and over again, but community resilience isn't born in a moment of crisis. It's built beforehand. So do the interfaithing light, the sharing of the meals, show up for one another's sacred moments, extend support in times of celebration and loss. And when difficult conversations emerge, having established connections allows us to stay engaged without retreat or rupture. And then maybe the last thing I'd say is, interfaith work is not about conversion or consensus. It's about the courage to remain in relationship even when we do not, when we don't agree. You have to be willing and committed to being in there for the long haul. So it's I think Father Don said it really clear. This work is long term, and culture change doesn't happen quickly. I think it could happen more quickly actually than we're doing it if we were more intentional. We're not being very intentional, to tell you the truth. And I think we could do, and now we have the communication abilities to actually do more work. And some of it's about healing. And my background is healing, so it's like I see that as a need always. But if we could do this more quickly, I think, and more intentionally, if we wanted to. Well, I'll stop there.
So I'll pick up from there and say everything that was just shared, 1,000%. I think the other piece that that Dr. Abadian brought in earlier that I'm going to start using exactly in that phrasing because it's so much more succinct than how I've been putting it before is we need to interfaith light before we can do it deep. that I'm not convinced that you can't do both in the same meeting necessarily, but no one's going to share those difficult conversations if they haven't built up the trust from getting to know each other and the fact that their kids go to the same schools or that they both end up at Trader Joe's maybe on different days, but that they really are members of the same community and want the same things for their community. And that the ways that we find ourselves trying to achieve those things may be different, but that ultimately those shared goals, I think, are what can pull all this interfaith work forward. I know that in a lot of different spaces, having a shared goal around different ways of serving the community can really lead to the ties that can eventually allow for the deeper, more intense conversations that also need to be a part of this sort of work.
Okay, so now it's me. Um, I gave a talk in Taiwan this summer at a Buddhist convention, and my talk was about how I think the future of interreligious dialogue is based in understanding the spirituality of dialogue. We have to be able to approach one another as spiritual beings, authentic spiritual beings made in the image of God. And in that desire for what is spiritual, and this is where the whole spiritual but not religious thing, we can use this to our advantage, right? Because everybody's spiritual. And what does that mean exactly? We're seeking whatever that divine mystery is, the meaning of life, or the what is the moral solution, or whatever it might be. To be able to look at one another as spiritual and recognize the person who is desiring that relationship or that whatever with God or with whatever, whoever it is, it's the same thing. As human beings, we're on the exact same level as far as how we relate to the divine. And I think we need to talk about that because that levels the playing field so much because we acknowledge already that you're an authentic spiritual person. In Nostra Aetate at the end, there's a beautiful quote. It says, we cannot call upon God the Father of all, if we refuse to behave as sisters and brothers with anyone, created as all are in the image of God. And then he quotes the Gospel of John, whoever does not love does not know God. Right? So it's this humanity that we share. And what does that humanity mean for people who are truly spiritual beings seeking for what is truth? I don't know. That's what I got.
And that's a lovely, I think a very hopeful place to to bring us home and to move us forward, especially in this season of Thanksgiving. And as we move into the holiday seasons for, different holiday seasons for both the Christian and the Jewish community, and a time of light. And I know for Christians, a time of hope and renewal. For Jews as well, in a different, more minor way, but still, it's important. And
And
yes.
and for Zoroastrians and Iranians, I just want to mention it's a
Please
profound
do.
time. Yeah, it's a profound time.
So especially as our days grow shorter and the night grows longer, and we are in these places of sometimes feeling a little both colder outside temperature wise, but also feeling a little bit of that chill. What does it mean for us to come together to push against the waves of keeping things separate and to push against some of those really harmful feelings of, well, nothing's ever going to change because, change takes so long and I'm never going to see it. But as you said, Father Don, and is something I really like to quote the story of, from the Talmud, of what does it mean to plant, even though you're not going to see the seeds, and it's going to be the next generation or the generation after that to see it. So we do this not only for ourselves right here, right now, but for the world that we would like to have. And may that world come very, very quickly. Recordings of this will be available. I'm also going to, once the recording is available, also encourage people to check out AJC's resource, Translate Hate. There's a newer one that was recently released that was done in conjunction with the Catholic Church, with the, I always say it in initials, but I never get it right, USCCB. Alan, if you could.
No, that's correct. United States Conference of Catholic Bishops.
Thank you. I was just meeting with them. I should get that right. So it's an excellent resource that I know some of the questions that came up about responding to anti-Semitism and how we understand each other. Resources do exist, and the goal is to get them into the hands of our educators. So all the work that we can do that would be phenomenal. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our incredible panelists. Thank you to Alan and AJC and Susan Crystal, our board member, for kicking everything off, and wishing everyone a safe and happy and healthy Thanksgiving holiday, and looking forward to continuing this conversation at another point in time.